Hi, this is Amanda.
And this is Lindsay. We're True Creeps.
Where the stories are true.
And the creeps are real.
We'll cover stories from grotesque gore
to the possibly plausible paranormal.
To horrifying history.
To tense and terrible true crime.
And everything else that goes bump in the night.
We want you to join us while we creep.
We cover mature topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey, everybody. So we hope you had a fantastic Thanksgiving, which in America was yesterday. So whether you've been creeping with us since last month or you're a fresh creep, we are thankful for you. And also, in honor of the holiday with the most awkward family interactions, we're going to tell you the story of an Italian soap maker named Leonarda Cianciulli who really loved her son. So Leonarda was born in 1894 in Montella, which is in southern Italy. Her mother, Amelia Dinolfi, was young and beautiful, and she was from a noble family. So she had lots of prospects, thought that she was going to marry up. Leonarda's father, Mariano Cianciulli, would not have been considered a good match for Amelia. He was older, he was known to be cruel, he didn't have the same social standing as Amelia, and he was at least part Romani. So Mariano saw Amelia in town one day, and they didn't know each other, but he became obsessed with her and began to follow her. And he started to resent her because he obviously liked her, or at the very least was attracted to her, but he knew he couldn't have her per society because she was out of his league.
Right.
She was spending time with one of the men that was a potential match for her, which is typical. And so she was getting ready to head home and he was going to walk her home. And she's like, no, it's right here. It's fine. So she started to walk home. And that's when Mariano dragged her off the road and into a field. And at first she was like, oh, this is one of my friends playing a joke, which is a very weird joke. I don't drag my friends into fields.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
he started to get violent, and that's when she realized that this wasn't just a joke from one of her friends. She also didn't really know much about the birds and the bees. So she wasn't sure what was happening. He was touching her body in ways that would be considered sexual assault, but he hadn't had sex with her yet. And so she was she just didn't know what was happening until she knew what was happening. And so when he was finished, he left her in the field and she was bloody and crying, and she laid in the field for hours, which this is all very heartbreaking. And so when she got home, she didn't want anyone to think less of her. So she didn't tell anyone, which so sad. It's already bad enough. This is already bad enough. The fact that you add the social stigma that she would be thought poorly of because someone else took advantage of her body.
Right.
Not okay. So it takes a few months, but she starts to show. And her parents didn't know what had happened to her and thought that there was she was having a relationship with someone, and they demanded to know who it was. And that's when she told them Mariano. And so the next day they invited the Cianciulli family over and they decided the two of them would get married. Horrible. Can you imagine how she must have felt to come home and there he's sitting in her fucking house?
Right. And it was just awful for her. However, Mariano was absolutely thrilled because he got what he wanted.
Makes it worse.
Right. So they didn't speak again until they were married. So that incident took place. She avoided him, and then they spoke again at the wedding. The new home was in the most impoverished part of town. There was no furniture. The bathroom was outside, and they had to share it with other people. Amelia and her family had expected that she would marry into another well-off family. And with that, she didn't really know how to do any household chores. So it sounds a little like Bathory in a way, but she was learning how to run a household at this time after getting married.
Yeah.
Mariano would force himself on her again and again. Mariano would beat Amelia when she wasn't completing the domestic duties that he assigned to her. He saw it as a rebellion, and she just didn't really know how to do a lot of the things. So it wasn't it wasn't her fault at all. He was just freaking crazy. And the sad part is when he would be beating on her, she would have to try to shield her belly because remember she was pregnant, and he would just still lose it. He did not care one bit that she was pregnant. And then to make it, I don't even know if this is worse or just, it was just this bad, but Mariano he was out drinking when she went into labor. And so she stumbled out onto the road, and then luckily some local women saw her. They felt bad for her, and then they were able to get her a midwife. And then on top of all of that, she had a very, very difficult labor. She had a daughter, named her Leonarda. Amelia saw Leonarda as a manifestation of her fall from nobility and the abuse and hate of Mariano. So she very much disliked her daughter, which is so sad. There's no reason. But imagine, like, she's looking at her daughter that looks like this guy that's an awful abuser. It's horrific. It's just so sad.
Yeah.
Over the next few years, they moved around because they kept getting thrown out of their homes because they couldn't pay their bills. Mariano didn't seem inclined to keep a job or realistically work. Sounds like he just liked to drink.
He's the worst, like the absolute worst.
Yeah, he is the worst. Luckily, the church was there to help, and they survived off of church donations. Amelia was ashamed because she needed the help because, she came from nobility, and then pretty much going from top to bottom is horrible. Amelia had no power or control over her life, so she exerted her power to the only thing she could, which was Leonarda. Even as a toddler, she would beat her.
No.
Which breaks my heart. There's no reason to hurt a child. And then on top of that, Mariano was abusive verbally and physically. So she just didn't really have a chance to be a normal human being. 3 years after they were married, Mariano didn't come home. Freaking finally.
Right? When I read that, I was like,
Right. He was a heavy drinker, and so it wasn't that unusual, but he wasn't doing well. He had a really bad fever, and he was pretty much in a coma at a friend's house. Amelia brought him home, but she didn't even pretend to act like she cared.
I thought that was really interesting because she was raised in a social tier where you cared what people thought, but it seemed like she was like, but I don't give a hoot. Think what you want. I need to be rid of this guy.
Fair. Well, they couldn't even afford a doctor, so he just didn't do well and died. Leonarda barely knew her father, so she didn't really have any sort of reaction to him passing. And realistically, her mother didn't care for him either. So at the funeral, after the gravediggers left, it's been said that Amelia spit on his grave. Amelia assumed that her family would be welcoming and take her back to the old life that she missed, where she had money, didn't have to worry about any of that, not have to go outside to a second bathroom. They basically shunned her because they didn't want to bring the shame back. So, like, this whole nonsense thing of if someone gets raped, it's shameful. Just, ugh.
Yeah. I wonder if they knew. Like, if they knew that she was raped. I don't know if it would change anything. I don't think she told them. I saw, like, differing accounts on that. Like, whether she told them what happened or they just thought that she got pregnant. But I don't think that it really would have mattered either way. But, like, could you imagine? She was like, finally, a relief from this life I've lived. But no.
Yeah. And they're like, nope, figure it out yourself. So then she started to go out drinking and dancing, and she'd just leave her toddler child alone. Amelia thought she was likely going to find a new husband pretty easily. But it turns out that most men didn't want to marry her, but only to have sex with her. Amelia eventually remarried to a man who lavished her with expensive gifts, so she kind of found what she ultimately wanted. Their home was a little bit better than where they lived prior. He spent his money on gifts for her, and then he also took her out quite a bit. They would, again, leave Leonarda home because no one cares about the child, unfortunately. The part that bothered me the most is that they didn't even feed her, really. She pretty much lived on leftovers and whatever scraps she could find.
So sad.
And you would think, like, because her mom was a little bit happier, like with a guy that had a little bit more money, because that's what she wanted. She didn't really care about anything else, it seemed. But her mother's abuse didn't lessen. It actually increased during this time. So Leonarda wasn't even a teenager when she tried to hang herself. She tried basically twice during her life. So once before she was a teenager, and then she tried it again when she was 13. I also read accounts, and I couldn't find any additional information on it, but something about how she tried other ways too, by like eating glass and like weird stuff.
Oh, fuck. Sorry, that was my honest and God's true reaction to eating glass. Like,
yeah. And a lot of this too, I will say just real quick, a lot of the information on Leonarda is all in Italian. So we're using translators and stuff to find some of the information. So again, some of the facts about her life and some of the things can be changed a little bit or skewed because of the difference in languages.
I also read a book called The Curse, and it's by Ryan Green. I'm not going to tell you the whole title because if you don't know, then you don't know some stuff. And We'll get to that. But I will list the book on our sources on our website, as always.
So Leonarda started to become a beautiful young woman, and she still, had noble bloodline in her from her mom's side. Amelia was excited to take advantage of the generosity to all of the suitors that came knocking.
A peach.
A peach, yes. So she took her time because she was excited to be back in that world where she grew up. So she figured she'd be able to find a good match for Leonarda. And then her husband would then support Amelia and her husband. So she thought, hey, I can marry her off. They could take care of us. All will be done.
What a time.
Right. Amelia didn't tell Leonarda, so Leonarda didn't think her mother was trying to find a match for her.
Which seems fair because she wasn't doing anything for her.
No.
Except beating her and verbally abusing her.
Right.
There's no reason why Leonarda would have thought that her mom was like doing something even remotely beneficial for her.
Well, it wasn't technically beneficial for her, realistically. She was just looking for someone to take care of her. Well, I would think that she would want her out of the house. Like, if she just despised her so much, just, how can I marry her off, get rid of her, whoever wants her, take her. But I do see that she was selfish on top of that and wanted money. So then Leonarda started dating someone, which was considered scandalous at the time. In 1917, Leonarda married Raffaele Pansinardi. He was older than her, and he had a low-paying government clerk job, so he wasn't very admired by her mom. Amelia did not attend the wedding.
Shocker.
Amelia then cursed Leonarda's marriage. And Leonarda took that hard, like that she put a curse on her.
Yeah. Question. When you read these names, do you think of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Because we have Leonardo and Raphael.
Absolutely. And I had to stop myself from saying Leonardo and Raphael went down into the sewers to eat some pizza, and the Shredder was there. And
perhaps we'll meet the Shredder later.
Perhaps. Donatello was somewhere. Yeah. Off topic, but I do have a tortoise named Donatello. And then we found out it was a girl.
Donatella now?
Donnie for short.
Oh, of course. I was like, or April. You could give them a wig, a red wig. Are you imagining a tortoise with a red wig now? You're welcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
After Leonardo moved out with Raffaele, she started to be her own critic because her mother was no longer there to abuse her. And at this point, she'd lived her entire life with physical, emotional, mental, verbal abuse. So just because she was away from her mother doesn't mean that she wasn't forever affected by it. If Amelia walked by Leonardo on the street, she would just keep walking and act like she didn't see her.
Right.
She's a shitbird, for sure a shitbird.
Yeah.
Because Leonarda grew up with the tiniest mistake being worthy of physical or verbal abuse, if she made any teeny tiny kind of mistake, she would burn dinner or make a mistake around the house or something like that, she would cry and she would cower away from Raffaele. And he didn't really understand why that was happening. This wasn't a time when people were let's unpack my trauma, right? So
right.
Leonarda started having seizures when she would get upset. And then they started becoming cyclical because she would be worried about having a seizure. So she would get upset and then she would have a seizure. And but it was because she was afraid to have a seizure to begin with. Some think she had epilepsy, but she was never diagnosed. She took pretty much everything bad that happened in her life as proof of her mother's curse.
That's sad.
Yeah. And this was no exception. And could you imagine if you believe that someone cursed you and then just everyone has bad things that happen in their life. Some are tiny, some are big. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little, but everybody's going to have hard times and adversity. And if you had a bucket to throw it in, this is all because of the curse. That must have made everything in life so much harder.
Yeah. Someone in my family believes the family was cursed. And says that all the time whenever something bad happens.
Goodness.
They're it's because we've been cursed. Our family line is cursed. And it's funny because...
Do you know the origins of the curse?
I don't know exactly where it started, but it's a couple generations away where I guess someone got cursed and basically said everything will end in tragedy or something. I don't know the specifics. I've just heard of it from various people in the family. And there is one family member that always says, well, our family was cursed and that's why. And
just so you know, spoiler alert, most lives will end in tragedy unless you're the Notebook.
Mm-hmm.
So Raffaele assumed that he would be able to work his way up at work, but that really wasn't the case because The people who were his superiors were kind of a noble class, and they were displeased with the fact of the mismatch in social class between Leonarda and Raffaella. So even though she had grown up in poverty, she was still like noble blood, and that made them mad, so he wouldn't advance. And so not great. So Leonarda went to a Romani fortune teller to have her palm read, and she was like a little cagey around Romani people because she knew that there was like Romani blood on her father's side. And I just think that she probably had a negative view of him. I doubt Amelia ever said good things about him. And why would she? He was a monster. So She was so worried about the curses. So when she went to the fortune teller, she said, am I going to die? Is that what this curse is going to do? And the fortune told her something worse than that. And she said, you're going to live a long life full of sadness. You will outlive every one of your children.
Yeah.
Woof. Right? So a few years later in 1920, Leonarda gets pregnant for the first time. Not surprising, her anxiety gets much worse. And with her more anxiety comes more seizures. And with more seizures comes more falls. So after 3 months, she miscarries. Again, she thinks it's because of the curse. Later in 1920, Leonarda and Raphael decide to leave town. And this is in part because her anxiety had gotten worse and her mother was there and he knew that wasn't great. And he wasn't moving up, which meant that he was going to stay stagnant. So I think he wanted to go somewhere where he could probably professionally grow. So they ended up moving several times, each time getting a little further from Montanella. And it was also really hard for Leonarda to find work because her anxiety was like ramped up from having seizures and moving and all of the change. And also like they weren't really financially stable. So she was just like generally stressed about that. I also think that she like most people then and now equates fiscal stability as like the baseline for living a happy life, right? Because if you're worried about like, will I be able to shelter, feed, and clothe my children? How are you not anxious if you are worried about those things?
Exactly. So finally in 1922, Leonarda successfully had a child, and it was her eldest son, Giuseppe. She was overly loving and doting. So she was low-key like obsessed with this kid. Which, understandable, like if all of her prior kids had died, like of course she's going to have like a very big bond with this one. They tried to have another child, but again, she miscarried. So it made her even more connected to Giuseppe. Leonarda gave birth to 3 more children over the years, 2 girls and 1 boy. One girl, though, died when she was a toddler, and the youngest boy died in his crib. You know, it triggered tons of anxiety and seizures. She started to tear her own hair out. She left her part-time job to obsess over her remaining children. Giuseppe wasn't even allowed to play outside or be by himself at all. I can't imagine trying to parent like that.
It's also interesting that like because she didn't have a good parental model, she did the absolute opposite, which was love him too much.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
So they did have more children. They actually had 5 more boys, but they all died as well. She started working at a bank cleaning overnight, and they didn't spend money on cleaning supplies, so she had to learn how to make her own soaps.
What an interesting skill to like pick up.
Yeah.
Well, if I was like cleaning someplace, I'd be like, you will supply the cleaning supplies and I will clean. I'm not a chemist. I'm not making soaps.
Soap chemist.
Soap chemist.
I am no soap chemist. So back at the bank, she learned how to make soaps because they would not supply her with them. Their 10th child then died while she was at work one night, and she didn't find out until she came home from work.
That was a bad decision on Raffaelli's part.
Right? I couldn't find information on how this child died, but I did see, I think a couple of them died in the crib. So in 1927, she created a false account in one of the bank ledgers and then tried to pull money out of the account when the bank was opened. They knew she didn't have that much money, so it was pretty obvious. She was then arrested, and then she confessed that she did it all by herself. She was convicted, sentenced, and put in prison. She served 18 months of her sentence, and she was in a prison that was run by nuns. So the nuns were, from what I understand, just pretty mean, and they would add years onto sentences for any sort of bad behavior. And the benefit for her is she was like super used to just listening to whatever her mom said and then listening to whatever the nun said. So she didn't have to get years added onto her sentence. She actually only served the 18 months. But others that were in this prison, I'm sure, got a lot of time added for any bad behavior. Raffaele's family gave them money so that they can move again and start over. And then he also started to get a little more bossy.
So they moved to another town called Lacedonia, and Raffaele got a clerical job that came with a house, which cool jobs
Right?
that come with houses, down for it. And they loved their new home, and he made enough money. And because it came with a house, Leonarda didn't have to work. Great. Another stress. That was good. And so, but she kept waiting for the other two to drop. Like she was like, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen, because she always thought something bad was going to happen. And she was always
The
waiting
curse.
for the worst. Yeah. So just when things settled down again, she got pregnant again. She miscarried again. She went to another fortune teller. That fortune teller told her that they saw prison in one hand and an asylum in the other.
Not good choices.
Tuck that away. Not good choices. So then, not too long after, Leonarda gave birth to another baby boy, and she started being terrified to leave the house because she was so worried that she would trip or fall or he would get hurt in some way, just because she's still worried about the curse and she's still worried about the first fortune teller's prophecy. There was like a Romani camp on the outside of town, and when Raffaele would come home from work, she would go like hang out there and like get her fortunes told, and they would teach her about the occult, and like she would be like, here's our money, which I'm sure Raffaele loved that she was spending their money on this.
Probably why he got all bossy.
I'm sure like he was also like, enough. She's probably acting like anxious, scared, and then she's doing things illegal and not even well. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to be a con artist, do it well. Don't like be like,
Right.
I have a bank account here with $1 million. Where's my $1 million? And they're like, you
And you
clean
make
the
soap
bank
for
at
it.
night. Yeah, we don't even have enough money to get soap. You think that we're paying you enough to have a fat bank
That's the
account?
exact
No,
term they
ma'am.
used too back then.
Yeah, exactly. Word for word. So in Lacedonia, during the harvest, folks would go help work in the field just to help it. And then also, like, it seemed it was like a fun time of year because everyone would help in the fields, and then they would dance and they would sing, and it was just like a great time. And then also, after all that, they would sleep in the fields. And so the whole family's sleeping in the field, and they're like sleeping like together-ish, right? And so Leonarda was woken up as though she was like someone shook her. And a few others like felt it, but they went back to sleep. But she couldn't because she was a nervous soul. And so she was laying awake, and then she heard her baby begin to cry. She went to pick him up, and baby's screaming, and she can feel herself starting to shake. So she thinks she's going to have a seizure. So she doesn't want to stand up and rock him. So she goes to wake up Raffaele, and that's when she notices that he's shaking too. What happens after is a truly awful earthquake that decimated the town. Roughly 1,400 people died in and around that little town. So when everybody was woken up right by like the actual earthquake itself, there were people in the town still. Like, not everybody was out in the field, just a lot of the people. The people who were in the town, the structures collapsed. Once the shaking subsided, the people who were in the fields, most people went running back into town to get their belongings or to help the people who were in the rubble because they were screaming for help. Leonarda and her family, they don't move because she's obviously freaked out for a good reason, right? There was an earthquake. And so she doesn't want to stand up because she's afraid she's going to have a seizure again. So they're just like taking a moment. Everybody who ran back and the people who were in the rubble died from the aftershocks. So like, again, 1,400 people died, which is a lot of people for that.
Yeah, that's a lot. And then one thing though, she almost should have thought that maybe the curse was lifted or there was no curse because she did live when that many people died. You know, like they just happened to be in the field that night and they happened to not run back. I feel like that would be more like, oh, I was protected, not that the curse was out to get me.
She thought that it was because of the curse that all of these people died. And in some of the things that I read, they talk about her being a narcissist because she thought she was like the main character of the world and that everybody else like was just like a supporting character. So that kind of just like reinforces that idea that she really was a narcissist because she was like, this curse and this terrible thing happened to me, even though she's actually like the survivor of it. After the earthquake, the town is decimated. So they moved to a town named Coraggio. And so at this point, it's Leonarda and Raffaele, Giuseppe, and 3 other children. They had in total, they had lost 10 children at this point. When they get to Coraggio, the whole town is very generous and they all help them get on their feet. which very, very nice because they'd heard what happened and they knew that they were like refugees from that. I kind of thought that she would just like place this in the curse bucket and be like, bad things happen. They're going to keep rolling. But she kind of did the opposite. She was like, this was the big bad thing that was supposed to happen. And it happened. So she felt kind of free, which was interesting. So with what they were between what they were given by the town and the job that Raffaele got, they were able to have a home, savings, and enough money to live on for the first time. So she was able to breathe a little bit and she seemed more relaxed than ever. Yeah, right. Finally. And so she was originally kind of standoffish to the women of the town when she first got there. And so once she started to like chill a little bit, she worked on repairing the relationships with those women. And for the first time in her life, she had like a network of friends. So she was like the happiest she's ever been.
Makes me happy.
Right? Which I was like, so happy for her. And so another thing that I love that was like she taught herself poetry and then she shared it with others and it like made her popular. Like people would like invite her over so that she would.
And I wish we could just be like, and then she lived happily ever after and everything was great, but it's not.
Yeah. The end. Yeah. This doesn't get really weird. So the house they lived in had a store connected to it, but it was like closed up. So she talked to Raffaele and she wanted to open a soap shop. And so they cleaned up the store and Giuseppe helped her paint the sign and they ordered all the supplies. And so she made a first batch of soap and she gave it to her friends to like be like, tell me how you like my soap. And then they loved it and word of mouth spread all over the town. So when she had her grand opening, everyone was there. And so the soap business was doing really well. So
Leonarda would invite her friends over for tea cakes on a regular basis.
What is a tea cake? I feel like I've seen like similar things where they're like, the poofy top, but they're going to describe them as crunchy at some point. And I'm like, I don't understand. And I Googled Italian tea cakes and it just showed me Italian cookies, which I'm like, does that mean it's the same?
From what I saw and like based off of the recipes, we'll say in a little bit about how she baked, they would just turn into like crispy flat cookies. At least with those ingredients. And from what I know about baking, they would just look like little flat cookies that were crunchy. Everyone began coming to Leonarda for advice. I think because they'd just sit and eat their tea cakes and hang out and she would offer advice and they just ate it all up. So
I also saw where like she would give people advice and be like, this is going to happen. And then that thing would happen. So she kind of had like some like premonitions.
Well, and remember when she used to go and like visit the Romani, like she might have learned a couple things on fortune telling and that sort of thing.
Yeah, she learned a thing or two.
Yeah,
from them.
But they would discuss things like dating, crops, and every adult just seemed to, go to her for things. So some people believe she could tell the future, and some just thought she was extremely intelligent and was so intelligent that she could fool everyone else. When the Romani would travel through the town, they would stop to see her, and they would bring her gifts to barter for soap. So like books on the occult, tarot cards, bone ruins, all kinds of things. Anything around like the spiritual movement. So she'd get some cool stuff. At this point, there were 3 different types of Italian folk magic, but she connected with 2 out of the 3. One was Stregoria, the other was Benedicera. So she really wanted to learn the rites and rituals of the folk magic traditions. And out of all of them, she really wanted to be a fixer so that she could learn to pick apart the curse from her mother and hopefully dissolve it. She had felt powerless for so long, and this pretty much gave her hope and like a sense of control. She thought that if she could perform the rites and the rituals, that she would be able to avoid the fate of her children. So remember, she had a couple still living, and she really thought that she could protect them. So on top of people going to her for advice, they'd also go to her for herbal abortions, fertility issues, loyalty issues, and simply just for luck. Leonarda was considered an expert for Stregoria protection rites in Italy. Giuseppe then enlisted to fight in World War II.
Leonarda found out because she was in town and she overheard folks congratulating Giuseppe in town, and she like swallowed her emotions, went home, closed the door to her study where she had all of her occult stuff, and just like sobbed and like broke down. And Giuseppe kind of like counted that as a win because she was like so smothering and like overbearing that he's like, this is a relatively reasonable reaction, because one of the things that we haven't touched on as much is like what life was like for Giuseppe with like a mother who didn't even let him breathe. Like, I think he probably enlisted so that he could get away from her.
So after she found out, Leonarda knew that she needed to save her son's life, so she would have to take a life in order to save it. Later on, we're going to talk more about this, but later on, she did end up writing an autobiography, and there was a part in it that someone had translated and put online, so I wanted to read that. It says, I couldn't bear the loss of another child. Almost every night, I dreamt of a small white coffin, swallowed one after another by the black earth. That's why I studied magic. I read the books that talk about palmistry, astronomy, conjurations, hexes, spiritualism. I wanted to learn everything about spells to be able to neutralize them.
Woof. So first what she had to do was figure out how she was going to attach the protection spell to him. So normally what she would use it was a bag called a breve bag, but she knew that he could lose this little bag while he was traveling, right? Because if he's at war, you lose things, right? And so she decided what she would do is she would make a soap that would cover his body, and then she would make the protection spell also in food, so he would be covered on the inside and the outside. It took her like a moment to figure out who she was going to sacrifice. That seems fair. You should take a moment to decide that, right?
Absolutely.
Make a wise decision, right? Right, like the first sacrifice, you want to figure out someone good the first time so that you don't have to keep doing this. You should really weigh out your options, think about how you're going to do this the first time so you don't have to do it more than once.
Is this a hint?
Right? Okay. It might be. So in this time period, women who were considered spinsters, which were women of an advanced age who weren't married, were not really respected and were ridiculed. And they didn't really have a lot of weight because generally, like, women's power kind of came from their husband at this time period. With the exception of people who like Raffaella, who had like a supernatural kind of like element to them, women's power in this time period was coming from men. And if you weren't married, then you didn't have like a backup, if you will. So she decided she would kill a spinster who wouldn't be missed and a person who folks wouldn't be surprised if she left. So there was a woman in town named Faustina who was often ridiculed because she was a spinster. And so she originally met Leonarda when she went to her to find a suitor because she'd been looking to find like a man for years and couldn't find anybody. And so what Leonarda did was she told her that there was a suitor in Pola who had seen a photo of her and had fallen in love. And understandably, Faustina was excited. She told Faustina that she had set up arrangements for the marriage and like everything was taken care of. And then she gave her some very specific like advice and instructions. She explained some people aren't going to understand the haste of this. They're going to be reluctant and they're not going to understand because, you know, they don't understand that this is your path to happiness. Because
right. And just to put a little bit more information on Faustina, she was around she was in her 70s at this time. Just giving this poor old woman the story made me really sad for some reason.
No, it's heartbreaking. Like it's just awful. It's just awful. So Leonarda, again, told her everybody was going to be reluctant. So what she said, she was like, don't tell anybody right now. Write some letters. And I've foreseen that you're going to have a safe travel. So in your letters, write as if you're traveling and talk about the fact that you're having a safe journey and that everything's going great and you're so excited and that like you're going to be married and all.
Why did she make her write the letters though, instead of just send them along the journey?
So she knew that the whole idea was so that this way people didn't know that they were missing. And like, if she had just sent all the letters like right before she left, then people would be like, where is she? What are you talking about?
I mean, I always found it weird when I was reading these stories that she told them, yeah, write this letter and say your journey is great. And then write another one saying that you got there okay. And they're like, instead of like, why? They were just like so excited.
Yeah, well, and she explained like people are going to be reluctant to understand what's going on. So like you'll need to like explain it to different people at different points. Like because the idea was that they would have letters from like basically like the beginning-ish of their journey to like when they got there. Mm-hmm. So that this way like it wouldn't raise suspicions. Strange though, right? Yeah. And so Faustina's pumped, so she does. And so Leonarda also tells her to pack her bags, write the letters, and then come back in the next morning very early. And so Faustina, again, very pumped. She comes. She has her bag packed. And Leonarda had shooed everyone out of the house like pretty early so that this way nobody was around. And so Faustina comes in. Leonarda tells her to have a seat. And so she gives her a glass of wine. She's like, you're nervous. This will help you. And Faustina's like, okay, great. Because she's very nervous, right? To meet this guy who apparently loves her from a photo. And then it's pretty apparent pretty soon after that Leonarda had drugged the wine. And so when Faustina's head kind of like lulls back because she's been sedated by this whatever mixture was in there, that's when Leonarda went and got her axe. I know. What's it with the axes? But this is what she used. So Leonarda's the first blow from the axe hit her shoulder, and Faustina started making like a high pitched whine, and Leonarda started like just hacking at her over and over. And at this point, she's trying to get Faustina to be quiet because she's just like hitting her over and over again with this axe. And it's not until like Faustina's like clearly dead that Leonarda realizes it was her screaming.
To kill someone she knew, I'm sure was hard. In her head, she thought she had to do it. It wasn't an option. It was either her or the son.
I actually don't think this was hard for her.
No?
Not this one. It'll make sense later because like as she continues, we'll get to that part in a moment. But I don't think this part was hard. But so she kills her and she's upset that she didn't catch enough of Faustina's blood. That's another reason why I don't think that she was like that remorseful, because she's immediately like, but my spell, not like, oh no, what have I done? It's like, I didn't catch enough blood.
I just thought that like under other circumstances, she probably wouldn't have gone and killed this random woman in the town. But it was like she had to do it in her head because it was that woman's life or her son's life. And clearly she would pick her son.
That's fair. But so after she hacked her up, she started massaging the blood out of all of the pieces of her just to get all the blood out because she needed as much as she could because she had been messy.
Horrible. So from there, she had emptied the blood into trays and then put them in the oven. This way, the blood could dry out and be an ingredient for her ritual. Once the flesh was drained, she mixed them in pots of caustic soda and dissolved the rest of the flesh, tissue, hair, and bones. The fat rendered down into a brown, bubbling concoction. And just thinking of it makes me like, uneasy.
Had you ever heard of caustic soda before?
I didn't. No, I had to Google it to understand like what it was. Let me read it.
What is it?
I watched a video on her and I thought I misheard it because I'm like, I've never heard of that before. So it's sodium hydroxide, and it's also known as lye or caustic soda.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. There we go. If you like true crime, you've heard of lye.
But I had just never heard of caustic soda, so I had to find out. And I'm like, oh, makes sense. She then mixed the dried blood with, I'm going to say from hers. She then mixed the dry blood with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, eggs, and then a little bit of margarine. Just a touch.
Just a touch.
So she made tea cakes. And that's her recipe if anyone wants to follow along. We'll judge the best tea cake recipe on Instagram.
Ooh, plating matters.
It sure does.
Do not kill your neighbors, though, to make these. I feel like the dried blood is an optional ingredient.
Yeah, no, don't kill anyone. So, like I mentioned, with her fabulous ingredient list, she made tea cakes. So when she bit into the tea cake, she didn't think it tasted weird. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
When she lifted the lid off of one of the pots to check how the rest was going, she realized that something had gone wrong. It was a gross sludge, and it could not be fashioned into soap. She took the gross liquid and dumped it in the nearest septic pit. She didn't want to waste the tea cakes, so she then fed them to her family and a visitor. She decided that the next sacrifice would need to be someone younger, and she needed someone that was more... She needed basically someone that had more years to live, because Giuseppe had many more years to live. So it had to be like an equal amount of time.
If only she had thought that, because she knew the woman was older. Like, she knew she was like in her 70s. This is something she could have figured out before.
You would think. You would think. So just
you would think,
kind of tying it up with Faustina, when Leonarda wrote her autobiography later on in life, she actually recalled in detail what she did. And so I'm just going to read a quick quote from it. I threw the pieces into the pot, added several kilograms of caustic soda, which I had bought to make soap, and stirred it all until the dissected body dissolved into a dark, sticky pulp, in which I filled some buckets and emptied it into a neighbor's cesspool. As for the blood in the basin, I waited for it to coagulate. I dried it in the oven, grinded it, and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, as well as a little margarine, mixing everything together. I made a large quantity of crunchy pastries and served them to the visiting ladies, but Giuseppe and I ate too.
How pissed would you be if somebody made you an unwitting cannibal? Oh, that makes me queasy. Cannibalism just hits me in a very terrifying way. I just don't do it. I can't even watch, if I'm watching a horror movie and someone's gonna bite someone's face, I'm losing my mind. I'm hiding, I'm screaming. I can't handle it. So there was a young school teacher in town who had retired to take care of her sick husband, and she was younger than Leonarda, and she also couldn't find a job. Her name was Francesca Soavi. And Leonarda, following a pattern here, was like, I found you a job. It's at an elite school in Switzerland. And she basically repeated the same process with Francesca. She had her come over. She explained I have a job for you, and then explained the whole thing about the letters and what she needed to do and to come back the next morning. She also, when she came back the next morning, Leonarda also gave her some wine because Francesca too was nervous. So the book that I read was as she felt the drugs take hold, Leonarda took the money out of her pocket. But I also I don't know how the person who read the book would know that. A little drama. But Leonarda did take money from the people who she sacrificed. So she learned from her first round how to not waste blood and how to do this more efficiently. So she started doing this methodically. She did have I believe she had a spell, she was saying, as she committed both murders. And so she set up the basins to catch the blood. I'm pretty sure before she started hacking away. And so she noticed when she was cutting into Francesca, she had a thin layer of fat, and she wondered if that might be what was missing from the first sacrifice, because I'm assuming Faustina was relatively thinner and probably didn't have a lot of fat. And so she repeated the whole process. She tasted one of the cakes this time, and she noticed there was a little zazz to them, and she was like, spell is working. But then she went to check on the contents of the pots again, and it was again this disgusting viscous fluid that she could not fashion into soap. Again, she poured everything out in the septic pit. So around this time, Giuseppe decided that he was going to leave early, and Leonarda heard from somebody in town, so she started to get more frantic.
So Leonarda realized her previous error. She hadn't done the ritual with intention. Plus, the sacrifices just weren't meaningful to her. So she needed to find someone that I guess the best way I could say it, she sort of loved, right? And respected and almost was jealous of their life.
It seemed like she picked the other two women because nobody would miss them. And so it ended up not being so much of a sacrifice in her eyes as a convenient target. And I think for that reason, in her mind, it wasn't a good enough sacrifice because she didn't believe it was a good sacrifice.
So enter Virginia Cacioppo. She was a famous soprano, and the locals loved her. She wore fine clothes and perfumes, and she was just very, very popular.
It also sounded like she was kind of posh, and that wasn't something that was too common in that area, because I think it was a little town. So I think she was just
in some things that I read, it was almost like Leonarda compared herself to Virginia in a sense, and just kind of thought if her life had been a little different, she could have been just like Virginia. If she hadn't wanted to choose her own husband, she could have been where Virginia was, in that place in society. So I feel like she just envied her life. Virginia would get advice from Leonarda. She found out, about the fortune telling from other women in the town. And then she started going. And then because she was going, it made Leonarda even more popular. Virginia planned on leaving town and told Leonarda about it. And then Leonarda thought of it like a betrayal. And from what I understand, she didn't really have any specific plans on where she was going or when, just that she planned on leaving.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that her money had started to run out, and she'd been relying on her brother and sister-in-law for a little while. So she had been She was like, I need to go. I also saw that Leonarda's popularity, people were still coming to see her, but she wasn't getting invited to like dinner parties and stuff like that as much anymore. Then enter Virginia, who's posh and popular. She befriends Leonarda, and suddenly Leonarda's starting to get invited to places anymore. So I wonder if she was like, she felt betrayed, partially because she was going to lose like a little bit of her social status because she wasn't shining with Virginia anymore.
So she did have a pretty big connection to Virginia. So killing her would be hard, but she felt like it would be an equal trade for her son because Virginia mattered to people. And yeah, it just seemed like an equal trade. So she made her plan. She said that she had found a job for Virginia and that she'd be so great at it, but she refused at first to share the details. So the secrecy was like pretty appealing to Virginia. She thought of it like a fun game.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that like they would hang out, and each time they would hang out, Leonardo would give her like a little bit more and a little bit more. She let Virginia like draw the details out so that it wasn't like she was like spinning a tale. It was like Virginia was extracting information, so it felt less
So
contrived.
what the job ultimately was to manage a household and business affairs for a working man. And it was in like the realm of the arts. So it was a good fit for her. She would be like going to parties and socializing, and she had a lot of like the inner workings surrounding that. And then that's sort of how Leonardo would get away with it, is like, yeah, the employer's secretive because he is an important person. On September 30th, 1940, Virginia left her home to go to Leonarda's. She was going to be leaving. She thanked her brother for his kindness, but her sister-in-law was already out for the day, so she didn't get to say goodbye to her. When Leonarda saw her, she was wearing furs and jewelry. It made things a little more difficult because she was going to be someone who would be missed. She wasn't, an old woman, and she wasn't just a person that didn't really have impact on people. She mattered in this town. And on this day, because she was leaving, she actually like looked more glamorous than normal too. So it was just a little hard for Leonarda. So Leonarda then, of course, offered her wine. And at first, Virginia was like, it's a little early for wine. I don't think so. But she insisted. So ultimately, she said something along the lines like, I don't know why you're so intent with me drinking this wine, but if it's important to you, then I shall. So she drank the wine. It's like the same thing again. So she took her axe. This time, the first blow went to Virginia's chest and it broke her ribs. And she was bleeding profusely. She then cut off Virginia's arms. After draining the blood, Leonardo went to putting the pieces of Virginia into the big pot. She could tell immediately that something wasn't right. The caustic soda started eating away at the pieces of Virginia, but it just didn't look like the right consistency she wanted it to be. Also, I believe it smelled weird. She just didn't think it smelled right. So I don't know what she expected it to smell like, but apparently she wanted it to smell more like Virginia. So she grabbed some of Virginia's perfume that was like in the trunk that she brought, and she emptied the entire bottle of perfume into the pot. So again, another quote from her autobiography, and I thought this was just kind of chilling. It ended up in the pot like the other two, but its flesh was fat and white. When it dissolved, I added a bottle of cologne, and after a long boil, creamy bars of soap came out. I gave them as a tribute to neighbors and acquaintances. Even the sweets were better. That woman was really sweet. Yikes. So this time it worked. As she was, making the soap and making her bloody, weird tea cakes, she also went into Virginia's trunk not only to get the perfume, but there was also money. And it was a lot of money, especially to Leonarda. And also, in addition to money, there were public bonds, jewels, and, lavish clothing in the trunk. And so Leonarda thought, this is it. Like, I don't have to struggle anymore. I have money. I have things that I can sell. It was just horrific while she's cooking her friend. So, as you do. The soap, like I said, was very rich and creamy. It smelled sweet and floral. It literally was made with tears too, from what I understand. So I think she was like crying when she did it. So what she did with the soap.
So she knew that her son had to use this soap, right? When you first read this before you got to the details, did you think that she was going to be like, here is a bar of soap, Giuseppe, wash your body thoroughly? Is that kind of like what you assume she would do?
That's the only thing that would come to mind because I'm a normal person.
Yeah, that's fair. So what she did instead was she bathed her adult son and she rubbed that soap everywhere. Everywhere. And so he was uncomfortable and like did not want to do this. He was like, so in the book that I read, it said that like he was undressing when she walked in and he like covered himself up and she's like, I've seen it all before. And he's like, give a fuck. I'm an adult. Like, this is weird. So like he gets into the bath and he like goes to start washing and she's like, give me that. And he's like, I can do it. And she's like, no. And then she like scrubs.
How does he let this
down.
happen? Because I know he was conditioned from an early age to just, my mom's a little overbearing. My mom's a little crazy. No. But then, sure, mom, go ahead and scrub every part of me.
Scrub my taint, mom.
In modern day, this interaction would be on that show, I Love a Mama's Boy. If you liked Smothered, the girl version, check out the boy version.
Oh, God, I need to watch it. It looks terrible. Oh, my God. Okay.
Awful, but this would happen there.
In the Smothered show, like, they share bathwater. I don't know. I can't. It ruined me. That was
just
bad
a little
enough.
bit of background. Little background. If you love TLC trash like I do, Smothered is mother-daughter creepy, weird relationships. Like she said, sharing bathwater or showering together is one.
Look, showering together is weird, but like bathwater it's stagnant. Like somebody gets in, does all their stuff, then you get into that same dirty ass water. It's a hard no. It's disgusting. I would not have survived in olden times. They would have been like, time to share the bathwater. And I was like, I guess I'll die of bad hygiene.
I Love a Mama's Boy. Right. It's pretty much like this entire story in modern times because it's creepy, weird moms obsessed with their sons.
Okay, so here's my thoughts. Giuseppe was like, my mother is going to lose her mind when she finds out that I enlisted. So he's like probably assuming like she's going to lose her mind. And like, I think he was like getting ready to leave when she did this. Like he would be leaving soonish. So he was like, this is just like her weird way of showing she cares. And I'm still her baby. She'd been kind of a loon his entire life. So I think he's just like more of the same. But so after she scrubs her son's taint, then they go into the kitchen and he is like just in a towel sitting on a chair, which like that's all right. That's also weird to me. And so sitting in the kitchen and she's like, would you like a tea cake? And he's like, actually, from that invasion, I'm actually not quite hungry. And so she like lifts the cake up to his mouth.
Force feeds him the bloody, weird, nasty cakes.
Yeah, which was apparently like Virginia sweet. And so he eats Virginia sweet tea cakes. And she's like, this is great. And so she's aware that he's like the fuck mother because he's like not okay with her afterwards. Like he can't look her in the eye.
Rightly
he doesn't want to be near her. And she's like, you know what? It's worth it. Yeah, for sure. Rightly so. But she's like, you know what? If that's the price for my son's life, then okay. Like I'd rather him live and me lose him than him die. Sweet. But you know, that's still fucking weird. So the soap that she had left over, she gave to her friends, hoping that like the spell would work on them. And then she also gave tea cakes to the rest of the family and visitors. Again, she's sharing her.
So after that, the families of the missing women started to question what actually happened. Mainly it was Virginia's sister-in-law, and she just thought everything about it was suspicious. Like, why would this random person offer her a job? And like, where did she actually go? Why haven't we heard from her? So she began looking into it, acting like it was a disappearance rather than a move. And she spoke with, townspeople. She spoke with Leonarda's neighbors, and they remembered her visiting Leonarda's, but they did not remember her leaving. So then she visited Leonarda and asked about Virginia. I believe she also got a palm reading, but she just got it because she was there trying to get questions answered.
From what I read, Mrs. Capucho walked in and Leonarda was like, hello, let me give you a reading, and like takes her by the hand and like gives her a reading. And then Mrs. like Capucho was like, okay, great. Anywho, my sister-in-law.
Yeah, she didn't really care. But Leonarda acted like she didn't know what happened. Because a lot of people would ask her for advice, and that's all it was. The sister-in-law then went to the police, and they really didn't do much because they were kind of friendly with Leonarda. So then she went to the superintendent. They started the investigation and they found out about the other two missing women as well. So they also visited Leonarda before leaving, the two women did. Leonarda mentioned that many women come to her for big life-changing decisions. They ask for her advice before they, marry or move or any of that. So it made sense. The letters were used as evidence. And then by the letters, which totally makes sense, they calculated delivery times, they tracked where they were sent from, they followed the postmarks. And by doing so, they got a description of who had sent them, and it matched Giuseppe. So they began to suspect him.
Didn't he think it was strange because he went to different towns to mail these letters? Wasn't he like, hey, Mom, why am I mailing these letters to people who are in town from other towns?
I think it was just, he was sort of like her. Like, if I just don't ask questions and I do what I'm told, nothing bad will happen. Because think about it, being her kid, if she freaked out and then had a seizure, wouldn't you kind of feel like, oh man, I upset her, she hurt herself? So I imagine it was just growing up in that setting. He was just like, okay, Mom, doesn't seem like it's hurting anyone to send these letters. So awful. Okay. So they then raided the home and the soap shop, and they found some of the missing women's belongings. Leonarda didn't get a chance to sell it all yet. So they found even the clothes that some of the women were wearing the day of the disappearance. And I'm like, come on, Leonarda, do better.
If you're going to be a murderess, you have to deal with evidence better. I also I love that there's a place in her house where she's like, and this is where clothing from the dead people go. Because wouldn't her family notice that there's like a closet full of
and
trunks? Like, I can't imagine it was like a giant grand
lavish
home.
Clothes. Like Virginia's clothes were pretty high end.
Yeah. I think they were in chunks, but still, I would imagine they would be like, what is this? Yeah. That being said, though, if I had a closet full of trunks in our house, true. Ben wouldn't notice.
Yeah.
You know where people look, Now he's going to start looking for trunks in the house.
Next episode. So he's torn apart the house again.
Yeah, there's trunks.
So they didn't immediately suspect that it was a series of murders and still believed that the women left for whatever reason. And maybe all of this happened because money would have been a motive, like maybe robbery or whatever.
Also, and we didn't say it before, Leonardo was like, Faustina, get rid of all your belongings. Sign over your money to me. And then she pulled the money from Francesca, and we know that Virginia had a lot of money. So she did get money from all three women.
At some point, they actually arrest Giuseppe for the disappearances. Also, when they were investigating, they had found a treasury bill that belonged to Virginia that had been collected by a parish priest named Aldalmo Frattini. He said he got it from someone named Spinarelli, who had received it from Leonarda as compensation for a debt. I tried to look up what this debt was or why she paid this person. Could not find any details on him. Spinarelli was also arrested, but was immediately acquitted. Leonardo went to the police station a couple hours later to confess. They still thought it was her son, though, and that maybe she was either helping, like an accessory, or possibly even trying to cover for him. Then she gave the details. When they told Giuseppe what she had told them, he lost color in his face and then started to throw up. He finally understood what the creepy weird bath was all about and what she actually put in the tea cakes, which was he ultimately ate and bathed in a dead woman.
Can you even just imagine the reality of that setting in?
And
absolutely
it was fed
not.
to you by your mother.
And your mom washed your taint with that soap. I don't know why I'm focusing on that part, but it's just she got everywhere. Yeah. So during Leonarda's trial, they didn't originally release Giuseppe. He remained in prison until 1946, and then he was acquitted for lack of evidence during the trial. During Leonarda's case, someone discussed how, one of the experts discussed how caustic soda wouldn't do what she had said it had done. And she said, quote, give me a body of any age right now, and I shall prove it. They also had the pots and other items that were used during the trial for her to discuss how she used each one. And she even noted, she was like, I am missing a copper ladle. And they were like, okay, where's that? And she's like, I donated it to the war effort, and felt very great about herself and thought that people were going to think well of her. But they're like, okay, but that was the ladle that you used to make soap
what if
from
that's
women.
In someone's house right now?
I'm sure they probably melted it down into whatever they melt things down into. But so melting things, copper bullets.
Tell me more about that
stuff. Anywho, so she was sentenced and she was convicted and sentenced after a 3-day trial. And she got 30 years in prison and 3 years in a mental asylum, just like the prophecy had foretold. Prison in one hand, asylum in the other.
So there's a YouTube video that shows Leonarda, and it's all in Italian. I have no idea what's going on, but someone was nice enough to translate where she's speaking in the video. And I will say, I think this is the right translation. It would make sense, but also it's someone being nice enough to translate a YouTube video, so who could say? But it was interesting. The law has condemned me, but I don't care about conviction. 30 years or life imprisonment or shooting. I don't care. 17 children. Ah, my dear, if 13 children would die to you too, you would do what I did. Only a mother can understand me. The law never. Science has perhaps understood me. I don't know why science would understand that.
Because they understand the caustic soda.
She thinks that scientists understand caustic soda.
For sure.
Okay.
Better than I do. She also wrote a 700-page autobiography called The Confessions of an Embittered Soul. And in that, she talks about her life, she includes recipes, and she has gory details of what she did. I have seen some arguments that she did not write that somebody else wrote it for her. Yeah, where like maybe her education level wasn't... Yeah, like I saw that maybe she wasn't educated enough to be able to write that much, but also like she was like kind of popular in prison, and like she had like really worked and stressed for like the bare necessities of life her entire life. So when she got to prison, she was like, a roof over my head, food, water, great, it's time to kick back. Like she thought that it was relaxing. Like she did not feel punished.
Well, she thinks she was just saving her son again. Like, hey, I got caught for it, but you know what? My son lived. We think. We're not actually sure if he lived where he ended up going, but...
She serves her prison sentence, and 1 year before she's about to be released from the asylum, she dies. She had intracranial bleeding. So when they examined her, she had cerebral apoplexy, intracranial hemorrhage, and that it was likely from the caustic soda vapors. Like they bored holes in her brain. So it was kind of like so that's what
I was looking at when they mentioned that it could be from the caustic soda vapors. It just sounded like karma. Like you kill people and then you throw them in pots with caustic soda and then they ultimately kill you back.
Yeah. So there's been many movies and shows. I think there's even songs about her. I was particularly interested in like what happened to her family afterwards. So Raffaele tried to
I can't believe that. He ate those cookies too.
He ate those goddamn cookies. He tried and he kind of couldn't. He started drinking really heavily. And I never saw any accounts of him being like a heavy drinker before that. So he started drinking heavily. And then before her trial, like he died of a heart attack, which makes me very sad for him. Because like he was like trying to do his best. And so additionally, her other children, like there were never any other traces found of them. People think they changed their name. And also like this was a time when it was much easier to change your name and to like start a new life. Now.
Okay.
Yeah. So her son Giuseppe left Italy without seeing his mother again. Like he never went to visit her after he was released. He was just like, he scooted it on out in the military. And so his unit went to Africa and there's no records of him after that. So he either died there or he passed himself off as someone else. Oh, and the pots. So also, if you were curious about where those pots and pans ended up, they were donated to the Criminology Museum in Rome. So if you're ever in Rome, you can check them out. So Amanda, do you feel firm in the belief?
Some parts of me want to say that maybe she was covering for someone and just did it because that was what she thought was the right thing to do. Or possibly even her son. Maybe he was a psycho killer. I don't know. And then part of me is like, I mean, she had a lot of details, but some argue, even to this day, that some of the details she gave don't make sense. So I honestly have no idea. What about you? You do too?
I think it was Giuseppe. And like, yeah, and hear me out. Because first off, the letters, why would he take those letters? Like, and not ask questions? Like, yeah, his mom was zany, but that was really strange. I also want to think that there were witnesses who saw him dumping the pots into the septic pits. And it's like a 46-year-old could certainly do the things that she said she did. Like, it's not as though she was like a 70-year-old woman being like, and then I hefted the axe above my head, right? Like, she was like a relatively young person. But this all just doesn't track for me. It doesn't make sense on why she would do these things. And also, okay, she's anxious, nervous disposition. That really does leave for the most part when she gets to Correggio, but it's still there. Like, I didn't see like lots of accounts talking about her having seizures when she moved there, because she kind of chilled out. So it's hard for me to imagine that for the first time in her life when things are going well, that she's going to do all this. Also, I would imagine that Giuseppe got everything he ever wanted.
Probably.
If they could provide it. And there's no doubt in my mind that if he would have done this, she would have confessed for him. I think she would go to prison for him. So, like, that makes me consider it even more, because I think that she would definitely go to prison for him. And also, like, the sensational way that she acts during, like, her trial and in prison and stuff, and, like, the 700-page memoir, like, it all feels like she's really trying to convince people. It makes sense. You know?
I mean, it definitely could go either way.
I mean, but that being said, like, she had a horrific childhood, and likely, I'm going to just go ahead and assume that she probably had a knock to the head at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us what you think. Comment, email us, let us know.
Are you concerned about the source of your soap now? Will you not trust your neighbor's cookies? Just consider whether there might be chips of blood ground into your cookies. That's a thing, right?
You know.
Is that worse than raisins? And with that, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. For more information on our sources, please visit our website, truecreeps.com.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Instagram at TrueCreepsPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/TrueCreepsPod, and on Twitter at TrueCreeps.
We'd love for you to keep creeping with us. So if you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the show with your fellow creeps.